So as we begin, my name is Abby Mohop, and I am the director of the Climate Finance Campaign for Green Faith. Green Faith is building a worldwide multi-faith climate and environmental movement. Together, our members create communities to transform ourselves, our spiritual institutions, and society to protect the planet and create a compassionate, loving, and just world. I'm here with Green Faith's Executive Director, Fletcher Harper, and Green Faith's US Organizer, Amy Brooks, as well as the panelists that we'll get to hear from later in our call together. So if you haven't yet, would you put your name, faith, and location in the chat? My child Juniper is with us also. Many thanks to the co-sponsors of this launch, Faith for the Climate Network, Green Anglicans, Hindus for Human Rights, the Islamic Society of North America, and the Ladakh Sea Movement, as well as Operation Noah and the World Council of Churches. Since the Paris Agreement in 2016, financial institutions, asset managers, banks, insurers, and others have been claiming to provide climate leadership through numerous statements, widespread advertising, media, and public relations. Sadly and unacceptably, their claims are far from the truth. For example, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, invests in billions in coal, oil, and gas, and is the world's largest investor in forest destruction, including in the Amazon. Vanguard, the second largest only to BlackRock in assets under management, is the world's biggest investor in coal, one of the two biggest investors in oil and gas, and has one of the worst voting records on climate-related shareholder resolutions. Vanguard actually opposed all shareholder resolutions related to lobbying on climate issues from 2018 to 2020. So simply put, these financial institutions must stop investing in coal, oil, and gas, I know, for all future generations and projects if the world is to avoid an utter catastrophe. And they must invest in equitable climate solutions if we are to have the just and sustainable future for all that all of our religions call for. And so I do this work for my child and for generations to come after her. That's why a diverse team of religious groups, many of which have provided past leadership in the area of fossil fuel divestment, are coming together to launch a multi-faith climate campaign, or climate finance campaign today. And we're going to hear from many of them today too. The goal of this campaign is to raise up a diverse array of religious voices from the grassroots to the highest level of leadership to call on the world's largest financial institutions to change. And today we will be sharing publicly for the first time a set of climate moral standards for financial institutions developed with inputs from the ethical climate finance experts around the world, religious and leading international climate, indigenous, and human rights NGOs. We're going to urge you to affirm these standards publicly and to call on financial institutions to abide by them. And then we'll invite you to join a global multi-faith campaign in ways we'll share later in this call. But first, we are people of faith. We'd like to begin by grounding ourselves in an opening ritual that we at Green Faith do together. Since we come from many faiths and cultural traditions, we invite you to take a deep breath. In my tradition and in the tradition of many, we often light candles as a way to center ourselves and to symbolize the importance of bringing light to situations that need to be named or made clear. And so today I light this candle, remembering that as we join today to talk about just climate finance, we join at a time when the world is at war, when our colleagues and friends and people we've never met in the Ukraine are facing suffering and war. And so we light this candle. We light this candle for peace, for climate justice, for all who have been marginalized in the fight, the work for a better, more compassionate world. We light this candle. And I invite you to breathe, remembering that our breath and the light we share comes across global solidarity. We acknowledge that the world around us is not what it needs to be yet. And so we gather together in the work ahead. As we continue, we want to keep this conversation grounded in the reality of communities which directly suffer the impacts of financial decisions made in boardrooms and executive offices in New York, London, and other financial centers. And so to do that, centering in the grassroots, I want to invite and welcome and celebrate Marin Wara, Greenfaith's co-director of organizing in Africa. Marin, would you please share?
Thank you so much, Abby, and sending love to Juniper, who's joining us today in the call. So my name is Marin Wara, and I'm calling in from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, a Christian, and I work with Greenfaith as a co-director organizing in Africa. So I just want to share with you a verse. Since I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, I just want to share a verse from the Bible that speaks to our work of what we do to the environment. And the verse comes from the book of Isaiah 24, 5-6. And I read, "The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore, a curse consumes the earth. Its people must bear the guilt. Therefore, earth's inhabitants are burned up and very few are left." So I wanted to share that because when we are looking at what is happening in our communities and what the financial institutions tend to focus on, then I draw back to the Bible that guides me and the Bible that gives me power to build the power to voices at the grassroots level so that multi-faith grassroots faith leaders can take action and defend themselves against the harsh impacts of climate change. And in so doing, hold the financial institutions accountable and say, we don't need fossil fuel because we will invoke the curse because of the things that we are doing. But we need renewable energy because by so doing, we are taking care of the earth. So what we are doing at Greenfaith is that what I've been doing with Greenfaith is that we are building power to voices at the grassroots level. And so in so doing, we realize that at the local level, grassroots communities are rich in food, traditional foods that they grow from the earth that is blessed and given to us by God. And that, so they use that to feed their families. At the same time, I draw from my own experience as a young girl living in the village. I would go kilometers and kilometers looking for water. And these water streams, we would share them with animals. The cows would come and drink water from the same place. And it is some of these river streams that our people would use to go fishing so that they can have food for us to eat. But I would still come back home and we use the same water for drinking, and we use the same water for cooking, and we use the same water for washing clothes. It's not as bad as it sounds, but the thing is, when we have financial institutions like BlackRock, or when we have financial institutions like Standard Chartered Bank, who bring their muscles and bring so-called projects into communities like mine, and for this case, the East African community in Uganda and Tanzania, these oil pipelines pass through freshwater lakes like Lake Victoria in Uganda. Freshwater lakes are the lakes that are used by fishermen to get fish to eat. Freshwater lakes is where we have biodiversity. We have communities using that water to drink. But oil spillages go into these waters that makes it impossible for little girls like me in the past to have clean water to drink. And so what we are doing is that we are building voices to power in communities, multi-faith voices, and we are saying, you cannot do that. So in so doing, I just want to take a few of my minutes to show you what I believe and what the Green Faith believes that financial institutions and asset managers should support. And I hope I can share my screen, Abby. Let me try. Is that visible?
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. So let me do that. So I want to show you what loss and damage in a community setting looks like. I don't think the video will play, but let me try. Sorry if the sound is not so good. So in the first video, I'm sorry, I just shown you a small section because that is raw and edited video that I took from a community that has lost its cattle, has lost its camel because of the impacts of climate change and because of drinking water from a contaminated, river that had oil spillages in a place in Kenya called Turkana. But the oil company refused to take liability. And so the pastoralist communities lost their cattle and there was no compensation whatsoever. Nobody took responsibility because they said that we had hired a farm to come and do the cleaning, but the farm breached the contract, and so it is not our problem. So this is a very lovely woman who was displaced from her family. And yes, I sought permission from them before I used their photos and these photos. She was displaced in her age as an African woman with no title deed because by law, traditionally, women are not supposed to own land. And so this is what she's been reduced to, staying in a camp, and this is what is supposed to be her toilet. And again, she's here with her grandchildren and her daughter-in-law because the man disappeared and this is where they live. And looking at this house, they had to seek refuge in a house nearby, that has been destroyed by floods. So in a nutshell, let me just stop sharing my video. Just wanted to give you a small sneak peek into, in a nutshell, we are advocating and asking financial institutions and asset managers to start thinking about the faces behind the havoc they cause so that they can start financing resilience building, to try their level best to make sure that women have have capacities that they can do their own locally grown food. Our national adaptation plan for energy tells us that we can have accelerated energy access if we tried wind power. So our motto is, we are asking them to stop financing fossil fuel because it is bad for human dignity, it is bad for the environment, it is bad for aquamarine, and it is bad for the ecosystem, but above all, it is not what we need. What we need, we already have. All they need to do is listen. And so the moral standards should be as clear as day, that you cannot preach water and take wine. You need to live what you do. Thank you so much, and back to you, Abby.
Thank you, Maren. Thank you for that clear call. And thank you for sharing the stories of people on the ground. As we consider what it means for large investors to align financial capital with pro-climate values and people, many are tempted to say this is too hard or it's too idealistic. And Marin has lifted up that there's a lot at stake. It's vital that we ground our efforts in our religions and faith, their teachings and worldviews and values. And because these are more important now than ever, and they hold the key to our future. Our next speaker is going to elaborate on that. Professor Atul Shah is a pioneer in the fields of ethical finance, leadership, and diversity. He's the author of Jainism and Ethical Finance, Celebrating Diversity, and many other books and hundreds of articles. He's passionate about business ethics, education reform, and diversity. Professor Shah also writes and comments for the Financial Times. And as he speaks, we invite you to share questions and comments in the chat. We will not be able to reply or answer to all of them, but our speakers are eager to hear from you, and we will incorporate your questions and answers in future programming and resources. Dr. Shah, thank you for sharing.
Okay, thank you so much, Abby. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, brilliant. Okay. I will start with a universal prayer. Shivamastu sarva jagata parahita nirta bhavantu bhutagana dosha prayantu nasam sarvatra sukhi bhavatu loka sarvatra sukhi bhavatu loka. This is a prayer for the happiness and peace of all living beings on the planet. And it asks each one of us to work hard towards supporting one another and improving the well-being and welfare of one another. So I'm going to be speaking about compassionate finance. Like Marin, I actually also was born in Kenya. I was born in Mombasa, in Kenya. How the world is so united in so many different ways and how many crossovers we have within us. So thanks very much to Abby and Fletcher of Green Faith. It's a wonderful initiative and huge applause for your achievements. What I'm going to do in my presentation is to share my research, teaching, and writings of an alternative compassionate finance, which is essential to the climate challenge. It raises profound questions about our theories, markets, and institutions, and their role in the climate calamity. In this presentation, I will discuss the vast wisdom that your own faith cultures in finance bring and help us in tackling the climate change. I hope this will lead to a transformative dialogue about the unsustainable paradigms of contemporary accounting, finance, and economics. And this picture is a picture of the London Jain temple. We have a similar one in Mombasa, Kenya, Nairobi, and all over the world. The Jains are a global diaspora. And it expresses the spirit of ahimsa, or nonviolence, and respect for all life. So we are living in the Anthropocene, and this Anthropocene demands a transformation of our ideology, and economics is a core part of that, and it has held a chainsaw on nature, converting it into property and resource. Can we really say we own the land, or that people are simply labor? As a result of a possessive and materialistic ideology, we have vast inequality and aggressive financial practices, and markets and institutions which have never really calculated their plunder of nature and society. The same people and institutions which led to this ecological calamity cannot suddenly change to be more ethical and responsible, and we would be foolish to believe them. We have no choice but to study sustainable wisdom traditions and their living communities and work with them to transform society. We especially need to draw from dharmic cultures and traditions, which did not see nature as other, and instead they understood the science and harmony of nature and sought to protect it rather than possess or exploit it. In the Hindu Dharma, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means the whole planet is one family, including all living beings. Now, this is a picture of the world famous city of London. And this is the laboratory of what we see as modern finance all over the world today. The city itself is a global financial hub also, but historically, a lot of the kinds of institutions and markets that we are subject to today were actually created in this kind of square mile. Now, if you notice carefully, right at the center of the city of London is the St. Paul's Cathedral. And around this square mile were at one time 104 churches. Now, London today, the trust has been eroded, and lawyers and bankers have little interest in the truth or even environmental justice. There is a finance technology which has come to dominate, making public critique very difficult. So faith and trust actually have become buried and removed, even though they were there at the origins of financial innovation and the financial markets and institutions. They have been removed out of the equations and they have been buried. Markets and institutions are not culturally or ethically neutral. They help shape a transactional, materialistic, and atomistic society. Now, what has replaced those churches today is the 1,600 pubs, bars, and restaurants in the City of London, which fuel the markets and institutions, not to mention the illicit drugs and the intoxication of gambling. Finance, science, and education fail to discuss this culture in their theories of market triumphalism. We have a casino capitalism resulting in speculation and risk rather than sustainable investment. Economics has been imposing a materialistic monoculture on society and calling it science. Evidence shows that beyond a certain income level, more accumulation leads to greater personal insecurity and suffering. Material wealth does not equal happiness. Ownership leads to possession, which leads to violence and greed. Parigraha. Accumulation of wealth is deeply damaging. So we live in an evidence science-based world. So I'd like to share some facts. And these are facts from evidence. A tree stands alone day and night, come rain or snow. On a hot day, it does not complain, and instead it provides shade to others. Birds are given free parking and encouraged to sing on its arms. It works hard with the soil, sun, and the rain to make nourishing fruit and vegetables and gives them to others for free rather than eat them for itself. Instead of seeking its wisdom and inspiration, economics has developed a chainsaw to extract its wealth and destroy its natural capital. Whole professions and institutions live and destroy by this bankrupt ideology. This science is unsustainable and has to be reformed from its very roots. It needs to embrace the faith and spirit of nature and stop turning the fiction that is money into a fact. It must examine the social and faith-based nature and limits of money and teach it to all students and leaders. Consciousness is key to unlocking the understanding of nature. We simply cannot separate economics from culture, belief, and nature. Money was created to serve society. Now it's become our master. Finance prioritizes economic growth at the expense of relationships or communities and changes belief in the sacred and eternal to belief in material existence as the only reality. The vast power of economics as a social science has led to a growing suppression of timeless wisdoms and cultures in finance. The rainforests of faith-based wisdom and culture have been destroyed by science. Social impact was historically understood as a necessity, not a choice. We are both nature and society. So through right understanding, we can preserve them in a natural and instinctive way. The spin that is often CSR or ESG is unsustainable without good knowledge and leadership. So love thy neighbor as thyself led to care and compassion. Trade is also a mechanism for building peace and community across faith and cultural divide. Our diverse advisory board at Oxford University discussed how history, memory, and community create a duty of care and a conscience of concern among business and finance leaders. Faith communities are also vast banks of virtual social and relationship capital, which the world desperately needs in this climate emergency. Interfaith was a dharmic science expressed as anekant, the multifaceted nature of truth. It did not need a new strategy, but was seen as natural to peaceful coexistence and was practiced long before it was labeled. So these are some examples of my own research and publications. It has been challenging, as in the West, the perception is that science is secular and Platonic. Decolonizing the curriculum also means allowing alternative sciences to have a righteous place in education and professional training. Billions of people of faith find no respect for their wisdom in the university classroom at a time when we desperately need a net zero culture of compassion and conscience. Similarly, the secular, non-secular boundary drawn in Europe and the West is very misleading. Dharma means the science of sustainable living in harmony with all living beings. For communities of faith, interdependence is a lived experience, not a theory or new practice. Sadly, professional training ignores the significant care capital that communities of faith bring to society. Ethics training has become technical and transactional rather than responsible and protective of all living beings. Not only should we decolonize the curriculum, but we can also at the same time embrace nature at the very heart of our teaching. The fact that faiths operate through living communities of trust and social capital means that they can be very helpful in transforming society towards a responsible future. Finance needs to value these faith communities, not ignore or discount them. Thanks for listening. And the remaining sessions, I'm sure, will continue to build on this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. And Abby, what I would suggest is that perhaps, because I'm not seeing any questions in the chat at the moment, that we proceed to our next speaker, and that will allow time for questions later in the program.
That sounds great. Now we're going to hear from Michael Richardson. Michael is engaged in climate and environmental action through the Rivers and Mountains Green Faith Circle in the Upper Hudson Valley watershed of New York State. He's a retired consultant to municipalities for workforce planning and operating budgets. And he's a committed environmental activist and is active in the Zen Peacemaker Order. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Abby. I'm going to make my presentation much briefer so we can stay with our timeline today. But do allow me just for a moment for a piece of inspiration. Many in the Buddhist traditions take what's called the 4 great vows. Sometimes it's called the Bodhisattva vows. And the first of them is to save all sentient beings. Some would substitute the word save with free all sentient beings, or to serve all sentient beings. The ancestor to the Chan tradition, Huineng, back around 700 current era, he had a saying to his students on this matter, where he said, "You can't save all sentient beings, but you can save all sentient beings from yourself." And by yourself, I would think what he meant is your greed, your anger, and your delusion that you are somehow separate from the world, that you are not totally interdependent and integrated into the world. So with that, we take into our service in our relationship with Green Faith and establishing the Rivers and Mountains Green Faith Circle in the Upper Hudson Valley, extending on into the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And in the coming year, I hate to say in the coming years, we are committed to supporting Green Faith on the corporate campaign for divestment of fossil fuels at the corporate and governmental levels. But more to our point here today is we are also going to be integrating into our daily service a series of workshops where we go to the individual. See, I'm going back to that story I was telling you about saving.
Get that. Could you try again?
About saving all sentient beings. So to get along here, I'm going to share this screen. And what we have is the individual divestment. And you'll see here on the screen that the first one is that we're going to be providing workshops on how individuals can move their personal finances away from fossil fuels. And more importantly, or as importantly, to reinvest in regenerative clean energy. I believe we're going to share this website from our local circle. And let me just note that although this is based on the Upper Hudson region, it is easily applicable to anywhere in the United States, Canada, and for that matter, in the world with a little bit of tweaking. So to move right along, Abby, I'm going to try to just get right into how we present this. Now, again, these are workshops that we do. They're designed to be 60 to 75 minutes in duration. And we look at 4 aspects in a very systematic way. The first is personal banking. The next is your credit card. The next one after that is home and auto insurance. And lastly, we look at retirement investments. Now, on this matter, what we're trying to get across is an awareness that if you bank with any of the Wall Street banks, it is very, very likely that your money is not being correctly aligned with your values. Now, the good news about this is that there are many, many options to using the big banks. So what we do in a very systematic way is that we provide resources. In this case of banks, we rely on our friends over at Green America for what they've put together on Get a Better Bank. We also rely on our friends at Stop the Money Pipeline for giving us a step-by-step method for how to go about doing this. Just a footnote, there are many, many other guidelines that will show you how to do this. And then we use this very, very useful tool called Mighty Deposits. And we can go into this tool and individuals can literally look up their bank and see how their money is being invested in the community, and also what is their relationship with other aspects that they might be interested in, such as funding for housing, local businesses, and the like. Next, we move right into the credit cards. And here, again, if you have a credit card with one of the big banks, it is very likely that you are not seeing your money aligning with your values. But here again, there are many, many options. So we take the participants again to our friends at Green Faith on how to go about finding a responsible card. And then we take time to build awareness around the difference between the bank that issues the card and the bank that is just branding the card. What we're most concerned about is who is issuing the card, which would be one of the big Wall Street banks. Next, we move into home and auto insurance. Many individuals are not so aware of the problems with this. Surprise comes when we start to talk about, do you know that your insurance company is not only investing your premium dollars in fossil fuel, but also it is insuring those very fossil fuels. You can easily understand that an oil rig or a pipeline or even a cargo ship that is transporting fuel across the ocean is a very risky business. Well, high risk means high premiums, and as a result, high profits. So these insurance companies, not only do they, again, invest in the fossil fuels, but they make a lot of money in insuring. And some, Liberty Mutual, for example, they have about as much money invested in fossil fuel as do some of the big banks. So what we will do is we will show people what goes on with the investments and the insuring, but we also provide them with resources. The most valuable of those resources being Insure Our Future. Lastly, we deal with retirement investments. And here too, as this corporate campaign is based, where we're looking at BlackRock, Vanguard, and the like, we will take the individuals through, as you can see here on the screen, the frequently asked questions from Stop the Money Pipeline, some overviews on how you go about divesting from fossil fuels from Green America. And again, we have a very rich tool from our friends As You Sow, the fossil free funds, where we can literally look at individuals' portfolios and they can see with their own eyes, not only how their investments are going into fossil fuel, but also to guns, tobacco, and prisons. Now, trying to close up here, as we go around in our communities, and we have a fairly large footprint here in the Upper Hudson, we have been meeting on a weekly basis with insurance agents and also with financial advisors. One of the problems that we have, unlike with banks, you can change your bank on your own. You don't need any help. You can change your credit card as easy as going online and signing up for a green card. But to leave the big insurance companies that advertise on television to go to one of the smaller mutuals or privately held insurance companies, you have to go through an insurance agent. Same thing on your investments. Unless you are very skilled at this, most of us will use a financial advisor. And a financial advisor is going to use an asset manager. And there too, you have to go to a third party. We find that as this demand, those of us that are saying we want green products is growing, the supply of advisors and insurance agents that understand this is very, very small and limited. So we've started an additional campaign to go around literally weekly to one or two of these agents or advisors and bring them on board. And we're very, very pleased to say that in the past 3 weeks, we have gotten two of the larger community banks to apply for certification by Green America and also go for their B Corp status. And that way growing the supply to respond to the demand of those of us that want to change to green assets. So Abby, I think that's about as much time as we have for this morning, and we'll just leave it for other questions a little bit later.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for lifting up how the industry and the financial industry as a whole has required us as people of faith to work particularly with asset managers for a better and more just climate world in this time of climate crisis. Thanks, Michael. So, people of faith have been joining together to call for climate justice for people who have been marginalized for decades. The World Council of Churches has been part of that movement, and now Frederic Seidel is going to share about part of their work to invest in children, not in the fossil fuel industry. And we're proud to have the World Council of Churches as a co-sponsor of this call. Frederic is the program executive at the World Council of Churches in Geneva. She previously worked in various countries for UNICEF as a deputy representative, a child's rights education program manager, communications specialist, and head of the field office. Earlier on, she served as the spokesperson for the UN and the OSCE in post-war Balkans, and as a journalist in Germany. Her current research focuses on solutions to the impact of climate change on child rights and engagement of churches to end violence against children. So like Maren centered us on frontline communities and grassroots communities at the beginning of this call, Frederic is going to focus us again on vulnerable communities. Thank you, Frederic.
Thank you so much, Fletcher and Abby. Yes, the WCC is a fellowship of 352 churches from more than 120 countries, representing over 500 million Christians worldwide. And in 2015, we started working in partnership with UNICEF to support churches' efforts for children and young people. The Church's Commitment to Children program was launched as a result of consultations with 245 experts from churches, children themselves, and child rights organizations. It addresses their answer to the question, how can churches best use their influence to improve the lives of children? The outcome is an action plan with 3 commitments: child protection, child participation, and climate justice. In fact, it was the children themselves who urged us to include climate justice as one of the 3 pillars of this program. Now, you may wonder, what does climate responsible finance have to do with children? Well, it has everything to do with children. And here is why. This is Mark on the right hand in the picture. He's 11-year-old and lives in Scotland. He used to be a passionate football player. At the age of 9, he learned about global warming. Since the IPCC report was published last year, well, playing football does not have the same flavor anymore for Mark. He started writing petitions and joining Fridays for Future. How do we feel about Mark when he carries that burden on his shoulders? How about the importance of lightheartedness in childhood and the right to play, which are so important for a healthy development of children? Well, Mark is one out of billions of children worldwide whose mental well-being is affected by the climate crisis. The leading science and health journal, The Lancet, revealed in a study last December that 75% of children and youth worldwide are as scared as Mark, regardless if they live in countries most or least affected yet by humanitarian disasters resulting from global warming. Here's a group of teenagers who organized a protest in the lobby of a bank in Lausanne, in Switzerland, very close to where we work here in WCC. They are among the very few young who understood how much the choice of banks have to do with their future. These young people implored the bank to stop investing into fossil fuel. And they played tennis in the entrance of the bank, urging tennis star Roger Federer to stop advertising for banks, which put at risk their future. These brave youngsters were sued and brought to court. Thanks to the support of lawyers, they were released of the charges after a long and difficult struggle. Neither 11-year-old Mark in Scotland nor these teenagers in Lausanne really have the power to influence the decisions of banks and to talk to BlackRock, Vanguard, or JP Morgan Chase. They try what they can at the expense of sacrificing school and playtime. But we adults, we can efficiently influence the investment choices of our financial service providers. Organizations, asset owners, religious communities can and must do this. Anyone who has a bank account. This is why WCC published this research called Cooler Earth, Higher Benefits, Actions by Those Who Care About Climate, Children, and Finance. It showcases good practices by churches which use their power to influence their banks. And this is why the church's Commitments to Children program encourages all those who care about children to check if their bank features on this report, Banking on Climate Chaos, which is published by the Rainforest Alliance every year. We adults must engage with the chief executive officers of these banks and refuse that our money is invested in sectors which are known to accelerate global warming. And here is a very practical, simple thing which all of us can do, in addition to endorsing the moral standards which are presented in today's event. The WCC, together with UNEP Finance Initiative and UNEP Faith for Earth, also with the Muslim Council of Elders and the New York Board of Rabbis, will soon publish a high-level statement asking our financial service providers to align with the Paris Agreement. You are warmly invited to endorse the upcoming statement and publish it on your websites. Many people in decision-making seats are not yet aware how much their assets are contributing to global warming. In fact, they do not have the intention to harm children. And many young people open their first bank account without checking if the bank they choose contributes to a sustainable future. They do not learn about this in school, and I think they should. This is why we started assembling free of charge capacity building resources for all on climate responsible banking. By endorsing the moral standards and our upcoming interfaith statement, you will help Mark and billions of children worldwide to lift a far too heavy burden from their shoulders. By helping to accelerate climate responsible finance, you will reassure these children, enabling them to find again that light-hearted flavor of a football game, to enjoy their childhood and go back to school, including on Fridays. I warmly encourage you all to have a look at our webpage on the Child Rights subpage, where all the resources which we assembled from churches and partners are featured, and the amazing resources which were just shared will soon be shared there as well. I was very impressed by everything which was produced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederic. Thank you for that framing and for reminding us that we need moral standards for climate finance for future generations. Thank you. So in this call, we've reviewed how asset managers and banks have continued to finance the climate's destruction by investing in fossil fuel and deforestation projects, and that these projects cause grave harm to frontline communities and future generations. We've reviewed that it is entirely possible to serve the needs of investors while also aligning large pools of assets with pro-climate stances consistent with the need to reach the Paris Accords. And we've reviewed that religious teachings require us, for the sake of the common good, to call for the financial sector to reform in response to the climate crisis, that really all future generations demand it. So we're starting this campaign by focusing on the world's largest asset managers, including BlackRock and Vanguard. Why? These companies invest billions in coal, oil, and gas projects. BlackRock is the largest investor in deforestation, including multiple projects that are destroying the Amazon. These companies invest in projects that routinely violate human rights and legal protections of indigenous people and local communities. These firms can become global climate leaders, and that is an urgent moral imperative. A growing global movement is pressuring asset managers to rapidly align their investments with a climate-safe world, and religious communities can be an important part of this effort. And indeed, we must be. And we're getting started together right now on this call. As we start, it's important to have moral standards for asset managers, and I'm going to share those standards with you. Just have to share my screen. There are 5 moral standards for asset managers that we're calling for. The first is to exclude all investments in any assets that include production of fossil fuels, deforestation causing commodity production, and companies with systemic violations of indigenous and human rights. The second is to demand real decarbonation without use of offsets from all investee companies, not just disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions. To establish policies that protect indigenous and human rights. To invest rapidly in just climate solutions and a just transition for workers and communities impacted by the climate crisis and the fossil fuel industry. To provide all clients a fossil fuel and deforestation-free investment option as a default. Those are the 5 moral standards that we're calling for. And we're asking all of you today to affirm those standards. And I'm going to put the link into that, to affirm those standards in the chat now. And on that, in that petition, or in that affirmation, that are all 5 of the moral standards, all in one place. So again, here's our ask, that you affirm these standards. In the coming months, Green Faith will provide tools and resources and more calls to enable you to share these standards with your asset managers and your bank. We want to help you call privately or publicly for your financial institutions to act. We will also be organizing grassroots multi-faith action during the general asset management season through social media and more traditional media on the world's largest asset managers, including BlackRock, Vanguard, and others. On March 15th, we will begin our public push on asset managers. And again, here's the link to the affirmation for the standards in the chat. And as Fletcher notes in the chat, that these standards have been put together with, sorry, I lost the link in the chat. They have been developed with frontline communities, indigenous and human rights groups, and finance people. So March 15th is our public push. And we invite you and ask you to affirm these standards. As we move towards the close of this call, thank you for joining us. Let's take a moment to appreciate this community and the journey we are embarking on together. Our solidarity crosses many countries and oceans, many faith traditions. Our solidarity is sacred and enriching. So let's unmute ourselves and say goodbye to each other in whatever manner we usually say goodbye in our diverse languages or traditions. Friends, peace, pas, shalom, salam, shanti, namaste, ashe. Please unmute yourselves and say goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Shalom.
May you be free.
Bye.
May you be well.
Bye. So glad you're here.
Peace be with you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
May you be free.
Good to have you here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.